Welcome to this BFI at Home discussion for a new documentary for BBC One. Subnormal, a British Scandal explores how Black children in the 1960s and 70s were disproportionately sent to schools for the so-called educationally subnormal. This one-hour documentary features first-hand interviews with key participants in the event, many who have never spoken before. They're telling their stories for the first time. It's directed by emerging talent, Lyttanya Shannon, and it's poignant, powerful, and sometimes I found the stories, I must say, quite painful. The idea originated from Steve McQueen while he was working on the Small Acts anthology drama Education, examining one of the biggest scandals in the British education system. Subnormal, a British Scandal, tells the story of how Black parents, teachers, and activists joined forces to expose injustice and force the education system to change. It explores the controversial debates around race and intelligence that led to the scandal and the devastating impact on the children that were affected. Now, Steve McQueen, the executive producer, says looking at the past is an indication of what we have achieved today. These documentaries show us how far we still have to travel for liberty and justice. Well, before I introduce Steve and the rest of the panelists, I'd like to welcome Emma Loach, the BBC commissioning editor for Subnormal, a British Scandal, to say a few words. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. It's an honour to be introducing today's panel discussion for Subnormal, a British Scandal. The debate, which we hope will stem from the film and from today, is incredibly important and urgent. As Brenda says, Subnormal, a British Scandal, shines a light on a shocking part of this country's history of which little is known. It tells of the iniquities, the prejudice and the assumptions at the heart of the school system, which failed many Black children and their families in the 60s and 70s. These are stories from our recent history that shockingly still resonate today. Rogan Productions, Lammas and Turbine Studios have produced an uncompromising film which leaves no doubt about the devastating impact that this injustice had on the lives of many young people. A huge thanks to all those involved, in particular to director Lyttanya Shannon, who, with perseverance and empathy, gained the trust of those caught up in this extraordinary scandal and enabled them to share their story, as Brenda says, many for the first time, which is a huge achievement. Thank you. And thanks too to Steve McQueen, who recognised the significance and relevance of this story and saw its potential as a documentary. So thank you very much. We are incredibly proud to be showing this film on the BBC. So thank you. I'll now hand back to Brenda to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Emma. Well, we'll start with the executive producer, Steve McQueen. We're joined. Executive producer, James Rogan. Director, Lyttanya Shannon. And senior producer, Helen Bart. Steve, I would like to start with you. I mentioned at the beginning that this originated from your work on Small Acts film Education, where we told the story of 12-year-old Kingsley and the devastating impact that being sent to a special school had on him. Why did you then feel there was more to tell and to be told in a documentary form?
Well, to be honest with you, I just wanted to sort of make it very clear and plain through this documentary. I mean, you know, we had an amazing talent who, as a film director, that we wanted to sort of find, but also it's about passing on the baton. And for me personally, it was to do with illuminating the things what happened behind the film. You know, the Black Parents Association movement, for example, and things like that. It was just one of those things where we needed to find out what was going on. And I'm sort of mumbling and stuttering now just because it was very painful for me, because to bring this story up, even in education, when we did the film, that was the last idea that I had. Because in some way there was a bit of a shame in me, a deep shame in what happened to me at school. And I know that my future would have been what it isn't today. How can I say this? My presence wouldn't be what it is today if it hadn't been for the Black Parents Association and what they did to change the law to sort of demolish education subnormal schools, because that would have been my path. And Kingsley, the character in education, would have been me. So, you know, these Black people made my liberty. So I needed to find out exactly what was going on at that time and sort of show to the world what was happening. So it's one of those things that even affect me today. And it's just one of those things which is just painful, but needs to be sort of dredged up and shown to all, and to see how far we've come. Yeah, it's just one of those things that were needed. It was a must, a want, and a need, as far as I was concerned.
I know while you were doing your Year 3 project, you talked a lot about the importance of education, the school environment in terms of being the formative years of a child and the impact that that can have on them when it's positive or negative or otherwise. Do you think in a way this documentary throws up when it goes desperately wrong?
Absolutely. And, you know, people's lives, let's be frank, were ruined because of this system, devastated because of this system. They didn't fulfill their true potential. And I could have been one of those candidates who didn't, you know, had an opportunity, opportunity of possibility. What you need is possibility. You know, people are quick to judge anyone, but they have no idea where that person will go. And I was sort of thrown to the sort of the scrapyard, and it would have been worse had I have not been had these black parents and educated not changed the law. So it's very important that this document was made, really, because it just shows how powerful we are as individuals, but when we come together and what we can change and what we can shape. And I am testament to that, sitting here and talking to you today. Absolutely.
We'll talk deeper in a moment about the directives that led to these young children talking about. But what was it with you? Was it behavioural? And is it the part of the issue that our parents, particularly that generation, trusted the education system? So your parents trusted that they do the right thing by you. Absolutely.
My situation, I had dyslexia, and it was one of those that I have dyslexia. So, you know, for me, it was a sort of slow process. It wasn't about intelligence; it was about dyslexia. But that could have easily have been excused and put into that situation. And it was, in a way. Look, my school, as I've said before, in some ways was invested in Black failure. There's lots of things I could talk about that, but I won't do it now because I won't take up all the time. But all I can say that because of the possibilities that I had, and I don't want to sort of repeat what I said, but I have to say that, made my life possible and others possible. Others that I don't even know, others that we don't know. But through the force of these Black parents who fought the system, changed people's lives, not just Black people's lives, but white people, Asian people, all people's lives. And it was these parents and these educators who would not give in. And I thank them. You know, this is who this documentary is for them and their recognition. And all of our recognition of what we can do when we come together. We can achieve anything, but we have to sort of have a situation where we come together and not think that anything is impossible.
So James, you all came together to produce this film. As the other executive producer, it is a deep dive into the subject matter, which is so complex and so difficult and so painful. What was your personal ambition? You had an hour to tell this story. And what were your ambitions with the limited time and access that you had?
Well, for me, the first thing that struck me was just the extraordinary sort of achievement of kind of rescuing the children from this fate of being labeled educationally subnormal. And that was the first thing that I thought was going to be really important in the documentary, was to get that sense of energy and that sense of commitment and passion, so that really it plays as a kind of an unfolding thriller as people realize what's going on and try and fight back against it. And that was the starting point. And when we met Lyttanya, you know, just had such a passion for the story and such a kind of an immediate personal engagement with it, that it then became clear in the production process that her viewpoint would also be part of the film, and she just ran with it and created something magical.
There's a powerful line in the film where I think it's one of the academics says, labeling a child as subnormal is one of the greatest insults delivered to a child. Do you think it's more than just an insult, isn't it?
Can you, I mean, I think when you know, when that said, I mean, can you imagine your child being labeled subnormal now, educationally subnormal, so-called educationally subnormal? I mean, I've got young children, and just the very thought of it just makes your brain explode.
So Lyttanya, James mentioned that this had a personal resonance for you and something that you really wanted to do. How did you come to the project, and why did it mean so much to you?
It meant so much to me. I'm from a Caribbean background. My family's Jamaican. And even within my family, like my younger cousins have had really negative experiences in education. I was really lucky because I've got a really supportive mum and people who were pushing me all the time. And that happens generally in the Caribbean community anyway, but it resonated with me because I've seen the impact of people being written off from a really, really young age. So yeah, it just felt personal. It felt like something that has happened. Well, none of my members of my family went to an ESN school, but they have been written off in other ways. So it felt very personal to me. And also to see that exclusion rates today are still highly disproportionate when it comes to Black Caribbean children in particular. I just felt like it was a privilege to be able to explore that subject and connect the past to where we are today.
And did your family, in any sense, because what comes through in the film is that for a lot of people, that kind of labeling or that kind of disadvantage does have a personal scar on them. Did your family talk about it to you at all?
Like my family isn't like, the experiences aren't homogenous. Some people have gone on to do really well, and then I've had other people who haven't. But what was shocking for me is that I didn't even realize before taking this project on the extent of kind of the institutional prejudice that was facing Black children at this time, specifically Caribbean children. It was really shocking to me to read in black and white some of the statistics and the facts, and then to meet the people that you see in the film. I think for me, it was just really humbling.
So was it easy, or was it quite a challenge in itself to find the people that were willing to talk, to share their stories, to reflect on what had happened and maybe still happening?
It was
Tell us
really,
about the process. Sorry,
yeah.
I interrupted you.
The process was, it was difficult. I find that, again, I don't want to generalize because Black communities, the Caribbean diaspora isn't a homogenous group or a monolith. But in my experience, there's a lot of pride, and with the term educationally subnormal, people are still scarred by that. They're still scarred by this stigma that's attached to that label. And so when we were trying to find people, you could hear, like, we went to meet several people who didn't appear in the film, but the emotion was so raw, like people were in tears, because I don't think that many people have had the opportunity or wanted to speak publicly about their experience in this system. So it was a difficult process to try to find people who were willing to tell their stories on camera.
Very few former pupils have ever spoken publicly about what happened to them.
I understand.
Hi, this is Lyttanya. I'm calling a documentary about...
I don't know if I can deal with people, me being on TV. I mean, I haven't even told my wife that I went to a special school.
In one conversation I was permitted to record, I gained some insight as to what might be holding people back. Do you mind me asking you why you don't think...
Very embarrassed. I mean, you don't want people to know. In those days, the term used, words were used like they would say you're slow or you're backward. And it was quite painful, it was...
But now, for the first time, some of those who lived through it are willing to speak out.
You do feel trapped and you feel very small.
Yeah, it makes you feel inferior. But having those labels put on you, year after year, you become that person.
So Helen, you were senior producer on Small Acts, Black Power and Subnormal, and had first-hand experience interviewing some of the key participants. What was your take on it? Did you reflect the same thing that Lyttanya was saying, that they were feeling scarred and it was difficult?
Very similar experiences, actually. I was associate producer on Small Acts, but when I started researching for Small Acts, and we're talking, it was a very long period of development, so we're talking several years ago, there were certain themes that came up, and one of the, the three sort of main themes were police brutality, or the Black feminist movement, Black activism, but the theme that consistently came up was this whole notion of ESN, and at that point, 2014, I'd never even heard of an ESN school. I kept hearing about it from the people I was interviewing, and over the course of the years that I did the research for Small Acts, I interviewed close on 120 to 150 people. I interviewed, scores of people, but this was coming up all the time. And amongst the people I interviewed were experts like Gus John, who we see in the film, Colin Prescott, people who really had a direct link, Eric Huntley, Jocelyn Barrow, people who were members of the Black Parents movement, who had been there at the time, who were telling me like it was, who were just saying, this is what we went through and we had to band together. Steve spoke about to try and sort of bring our children out of this horror that was unfolding between, in our eyes and stuff. And I did actually find 3 people who had been to ESN schools, and 2 of them, they were men, they were friends. They refused to go on record. So I was able to meet them and interview them, and they told me all of their horrific experiences, but they didn't want to go on tape. Eventually I found somebody who was my hairdresser's mother, who just I was getting my hair done, and she just happened to sort of mention about her mother's awful experiences at school. And I just said, she didn't by any chance go to an ESN school? And she said, yes, she did. And it took months of trying to persuade her. At this point, I was quite desperate to speak to somebody who'd been to an ESN school to actually get them on tape for Steve, because Steve was writing the episode of Education with Alistair. And I eventually persuaded her, and she gave me her experiences, which were not necessarily horrific, but that she was still sort of shrouded in shame. And when it came to doing these documentaries, when it came to doing this documentary, she didn't want to go on camera. She just said, look, Helen, I was prepared to talk to you and Steve, but I don't want to go on camera. I'm 70 years old. And the only people that know about this are you, Steve, and my family. I don't want the world to know. So all these years later, 5 decades later, 6 decades later, it was still shrouded in so much shame. So when me and Lyttanya and Bea, our amazing assistant producer, started, we literally starting from scratch, weren't we, Lyttanya? We were literally starting from having to find new case studies. And as Lyttanya says, the whole process of getting to persuade people to speak to us was extremely difficult. But then we did find 3 incredibly courageous people who you see in the documentary.
For Noelle, being taught in such an environment had long-lasting effects.
People who live at ESN schools, right, we get bullied throughout life because we don't know the norms, we don't know how things work. So how the hell am I going to cope in a society like this? Yeah, it makes you feel inferior. But having those labels put on you, year after year, you become that person.
With the term special often used in place of the term educationally subnormal, many Caribbean parents were initially unaware of how their children were being identified. Noelle wanted to hear from his mum what she understood to be happening at the time.
So, Mum, how are you feeling today? How are you feeling today?
Oh, not too bad.
I get confused, you're 93 or 94?
I will be 94 the 31st day of May coming.
Next year, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you remember how I ended up in that school?
Yes.
Because I was too young to remember how I think I was 6 and a half.
He said that they're going to put you in this special school where teachers and doctors are. If you take down ill, they can see you go right.
Okay, but
I remember that.
But he never told you what type of school it was?
No.
What kind of education did you think I would get?
Good education, that you can do what you want to do.
Yes, I see.
That's what we were looking for.
Yeah.
the education is the most essential thing parents can give to children.
Yes, I see. So did you think they lied to you? Did you feel disappointed?
Yes. They disappoint me and your dad. Your dad died with that in his heart.
I think the people who spoke, Maisie, Noel and Anne-Marie, like they had, for them, it was really important for them to actually have a voice in the end. Like Noel was determined to tell his story because he still, if you speak to him today, he still feels like a deep sense of injustice about the way that his education has impacted his life and his confidence. And so for him, this was just to be able to speak, I think, was a cathartic and a vindication really of what he's experienced.
But the mental torture was so profound. I remember, every time I get into a car, taxi, whatever, or we start speaking to the driver, and I remember speaking to this one chap, this one dude, and he was talking to me about his education. I said, "Oh, where'd you go?" And through him talking to me, I realized, oh, so it was educationally subnormal school. I said it to him, and he froze. It's almost like the first time he heard that phrase for 30 odd years, and he really stiffened up. And just through talking to him, I realized that he had gone to this ESL school, and the mental torture was such. It was his post-distress order. Definitely, he had post-distress order. Absolutely, people have been tortured, mentally tortured with this system. Absolutely, they're walking wounded everywhere, and the repercussions that happen to the loved ones and their children, the reverberations are just huge, huge, huge.
And I think in order to understand why it's so painful and destructive, you've got to kind of understand the importance of education, particularly in the West Indies, the Caribbean, how it was almost seen as a passport to prosperity, a passport to a new life, a better life. Do you think that's fair to say, Steve?
Absolutely. This is why parents came here for. I mean, I think that's it. I mean, to better themselves, better ourselves, be better than your mother and your father, and education. Absolutely. And that we trusted, trusted the education system, trusted the teachers, trusted the headmasters, and only to be failed. And I think, what Lyttanya did with this film was pretty miraculous in sort of just translating that for everyone to see in broad daylight. And one person we're forgetting here is Tracy Scofield, the other executive producer, who did an amazing job. But Lyttanya, brought it home, brought the film home.
I think with the help of everyone.
Yeah, you absolutely did, Lyttanya. And I think it's really important, something that you raised earlier, Steve, to talk about the mobilization of the parents, how the Black parents themselves are responsible for sort of trying to change these laws, to bring it to people's attention. Of course, there were people like Bernard Cord who wrote that seminal text, who wrote that seminal book. But the Black parents movement and some of the affiliated movements like the Caribbean artists movements, which, esteemed activists like Linton Kwesi Johnson belonged to, and they were all, John LaRose, people like that, they were just absolutely determined to bring this to the public's attention, and we owe them so much.
So Lyttanya, can you tell me when you think things began to change? Was it with the publication of Bernard Cohen's book, Tell It Like It Is, How Our Schools Fail Black Children, which was published in 1971 and spawned a national debate?
It was definitely a seminal moment, just because there was a lot of conversation between Caribbean parents about what was going on. Like, even in my family, my mom told me about like dustbin schools. So they weren't known, like they were the rubbish schools that kids got sent to. And I think the text that Bernard Cord wrote was the moment that people had the information in black and white in front of them, and to be confronted with that. And what was amazing about Cord's text is that he addressed it to Black Caribbean parents. So it wasn't for anyone else. It was for them to be informed, and then to be able to use that as a tool for change. So I think it was just, it kind of blew everything open. The Caribbean parents were talking about this anyway, but here you had something that proved that their suspicions were in fact correct, and they didn't need to be gaslighted anymore because the facts and figures were there in black and white.
I went to the London University Institute of Education Library, and I would be there until 9 in the night, and whatever the closing hours, they kicked me out. I knew I wanted to find everything they had on teacher expectations, everything they had on self-image. I wanted everything on a range of different topics that I had experienced in the schools and in the youth clubs too, that the children had as deficits imposed upon them by the system.
Bernard's research was given a major boost when a chance conversation led to a significant discovery.
People that I was discussing the matter with, a cousin of mine, she had this friend in a London Education Authority, or ILEA, who gave her an internal report, and she said, this is a scandal, it needs to be exposed.
The leaked report from the ILEA contained a multitude of damning admissions. It revealed that the Education Authority was well aware that Caribbean children were being wrongly placed in ESN schools at much higher rates than their white peers. The implied reason? Not a lack of intellectual ability, but the fact that they were thought to be culturally deprived and emotionally disturbed.
And the way he tells the story, it's a beautiful way where he's at a party and then he starts talking and it moves, and then suddenly people are hungry for that support and knowledge, and that just shows how desperate they were.
Yeah, definitely. Because if people are coming here for the betterment of the next generation, right? So my nan and granddad came here specifically because they wanted their family to do well, and there was no reason to suspect that coming over here they would face the level of prejudice that they did. There was no reason for them to suspect that because that wasn't their experience back home. And that wasn't what they were led to believe coming to the UK would be like.
I was just going to add about the book is that one of the things that was so devastating about the book was that he used the ILEA, a leaked report from the London Education Authority. So he was using the figures, the statistics and information from the London Education Authority, which showed that they knew what was happening and had decided not to do anything about it. So the really, in the film, and it's beautifully constructed the way that Lyttanya tells it, is there is a moment of realization that this wasn't just a scandal that had happened by accident. This was a scandal that had happened with the complicit knowledge of the education system in England. And so at that point, the whole sense of what's happened, it's not a mistake, it's deliberate. And that just gives the whole story a completely different complexion. And raises the fundamental question of the robbing of innocence of young children. You know, how you take away the ability of a child to just be who they are. They're being consigned in disproportionate numbers to a label that nobody would willingly put on their own child inaccurately.
I think the biggest crime is not caring. That's the biggest crime, not caring. That's I mean, you know, that's what you're taught from day one, to look after each other, to be kind. Yeah. And the cruelty of not caring and perpetuating stereotypes because it suits you down to the ground, and it's convenient because if there's a stereotype, well, you can say, well, you see, look, they're not very bright, are they? It's a convenient thing to do, and you know, that kind of stereotype will help your argument. Yeah.
And I think it was definitely a lot to do with laziness, the convenience of kind of, you know, Caribbean children were seen as a hindrance, as a problem within the classroom. And the easiest way to deal with that problem was to remove them from the classroom rather than to invest in contributing to the development of a child. And I think when we were discussing kind of what we wanted to get across, as James mentioned, it is that lack of innocence. Like, how can anyone look at any child and think it's actually more convenient for me to like throw you away rather than to invest in you and to nurture you, which is what every child deserves. So yeah, it was that at that kind of structural and institutional level where it became clear that this was a convenient, deliberate decision. I think that's what's really shocking about the whole thing.
Yes, but I have to litigate. What the main thing was, yes, absolutely, was the fact that there was a stereotype already existing. So it was easy for that to happen. It was easy because, oh yeah, that black boy, that black girl, oh, they're stupid because of the stereotype. And the stereotype has been going for centuries. So it was a case of not caring, but the fact that it was set up there for them already. So it was easy for that to happen. Easy. I mean, I've experienced it firsthand. Easy. And, you know, again, you know, it's one of those things, you know, where now people are talking about it, but it's easy. It was easy for them to discard, easy for them not to care because, you know, it'd been proven that these people are not particularly bright.
As we got older, I'd open the book and it would just be black lines on white paper just moving about. When other children my age could actually read the book. So I would get told off for being fidgeting. I would get my ears pulled because I'm moving about. Or I might just fall asleep. Literally because I was so bored because I didn't understand. It wasn't called dyslexia in those days. It was called word blindness.
Maisie believes her dyslexia made her stand out.
I was called to the headmistress' office and she gave me some instructions and she said to me, get up, open the door and go downstairs and come back. And that is what I did. And I remember her telling my mother that I need special support because I was backward. All of a sudden, I was in this other school.
And there were, as you highlight throughout the film, other flimsy directives. I mean, Steve, you talked about your dyslexia. So when Maisie came along, the similar story, that must have been quite a thing for you.
All the stories are kind of, even if it's dyslexia or needing help with one thing or the other, because I think everyone has to fulfill their full potential. And it's one of those things where, you know, it's I cannot, I'm talking in circles, but it's one of those things where I know that it just hurts because I know what could have happened to me. I know what happened to people that I knew at school and where they are now. I know firsthand that what happened was when a certain kind of currency came into effect of being tough, because people don't, you think that's the next thing I can get to. I could be tough. I could be, you know, I could fight, because that's your academic or your sort of educational sort of or intelligence is not being given a chance, but maybe my physicality can. So that's what people turn to, a certain kind of way of living or being or acting or behaving, because that they get currency because it's cool. You see, so I saw a lot of beautiful, beautiful, beautiful black boys, black children turn into something else, which they were not. But that were the only space where they got respect, or they got a certain kind of currency. So that breaks my heart when you see these beautiful men, these beautiful children, beautiful women who change, who turn, because that's the only place that they get some kind of attention. And it's a downhill from there. And then they get criminalized, and they get, you know, all these things happen. So I'm telling you, I know that and also thank God for Saturday schools. You know, what these black parents did was create these Saturday schools, which I went to, a number of them, 2 of them, which were amazing, because you saw people like yourself there. And, you know, these black parents going in there. I mean, I missed my football focus every Saturday, which I was really pissed off with. But obviously I got a lot from it, which was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. But it's when I look back, it hurts. It hurts a lot, even today.
Now, Helen, you were nodding when Steve mentioned the Saturday schools. How important was it when Black parents and activists were empowering themselves and bringing these schools up? What difference do you think that made?
It made an enormous difference. I mean, the thing about the Black supplementary school movement, it was effectively started by people like John LaRose and Albertina Sylvester. We interview, well, Steve and I interviewed Albertina Sylvester's son. He's not in this documentary, but John LaRose's son is in this documentary, and his partner, Sarah White. And it started off in their homes. So they kind of, in North London, they had like, they came together as parents and activists to sort of start these supplementary schools in their homes. And the whole movement just flourished across, well, across Britain, I assume, you know, but definitely in London where we're from, you know, it was just a huge thing. I went to Saturday school. You know, and one of the things that's very telling in the documentaries, I mean, I'm in my early 50s. I mean, I'm not far off from Noel. He's 54 years old. I mean, it really could have been, you know, I didn't have as bad experiences as what Steve has experienced, but, you know, my parents were aware that it could have been me, my brothers. So we were in those schools every Saturday, and the Black supplementary school movement was instrumental in instilling a sense of Black consciousness and pride within the children, and Black history. And that could not be, yes, you know, that can't be underestimated. Oh, that was like the beginnings of the movement to get Black history recognized in Britain. And now it roundly is. So, you know, we have them to thank.
The other thing that really got to me is that I remember is when there's a whole debate about language and the use of language. So I remember at school, I'm from St. Caribbean parents and heritage, but the girls I hang around with, they were all Jamaican. They were all really confident, and I loved them. I loved being around them. So I used to adopt the Jamaican slang to fit in and be part of that. But the minute I'd go home, my mum would have a fit. It'd be this, and we used to laugh at her. She had a really strong West Indian accent. But she'd say, "Speak English, speak English." And we said, "You're not speaking English. Why do you want us to speak English?" And there's a whole thing about speaking English to be accepted, and the whole importance of language. And here you highlight the fact that it was seen as they were speaking a bad version of English, and that Asian children were given more support because it was accepted that English was their second language. Lyttanya, can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I've got the ILEA report here. I'm just going to read a sentence. It is not always possible to distinguish between lack of English and a general retardation in language development. It's just like, you know, it's just, I can actually relate to that personally, because my grandparents were Jamaican, and my mom had me when she was 19 years old and wanted to continue her education. So they were kind of very prominent in my upbringing. But at the age of 4, I couldn't speak English. I was speaking with a Jamaican patois accent. And my mom was so aware at that stage that would be detrimental for me, and so took me out of the care of my nan and granddad and put me with a childminder so that I'd start to develop what others consider a proper way of speaking. And again, I think that's just this kind of projection of supremacy and this kind of ignorance towards other people's language and culture, and an acceptance that intelligence can exist within those languages too. So I just think the whole thing was just really it was kind of this like very arrogant way of dealing with everyone who wasn't middle class, white and British, and it had such a detrimental effect on the lives of thousands of young Black kids.
Waveney Bushell was one of the UK's first Black educational psychologists and worked as one for 40 years. She also administered IQ tests.
You know, when these children were taking the test, what were their reactions?
The children didn't know what the tests were, particularly those who came from the West Indies. What the test was thought to represent the true intelligence of the child. But these tests were clearly made up not to test children from different cultures. It meant that one was comparing, I would say, apples with lemons.
Just to press the fast forward button, I mean, you know, there's this report that came out recently. You know, this interesting report that came out recently on race in the UK. Totally, yeah. What can I tell you? I mean, whatever. I mean, it's been debunked all over the gaff. So one of the aspects of it is Caribbean children doing badly at school. The thing is almost like, what do you expect? The history, the lineage, the narrative of what's happening to those children and their parents, you know, what's happened. And, you know, there's this kind of trauma. You have to, in order to fix something, you have to go to the root or something. And you see that journey through a subnormal, and you come to a situation of today. And this, what can I say? What can I say? What I don't even want to call it. I call it whatever, interesting report. And what they discovered in that, I mean, there's a history and there's a root to it. So let's deal with that.
James,
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the things about these films that we've been making, you know, and small acts and documentaries we've been making, and the films that we've been making at Rogan Productions is that because there's so little awareness of our history, our recent history, especially in terms of race and the struggle that Black people have had on almost every front to get some kind of equality of acceptance. And because that is not widely accepted, there is a constant sort of reactionary tendency to sort of try and sort of wave it away. And I think, you know, when you look at things like Stop and Search, you're looking at a situation where 3 or 4 generations of people have been stopped and searched massively disproportionately. And that has to be sort of understood at a general level when these conversations happen. It's the same with the education story, that you can't look at it as if like goldfish, like every decade we just wake up afresh and pretend the decade before didn't happen. And that's the thing, a process that is gradually kind of coming to the fore. But given the fact that in the early 70s, Bernard Cord was raising the same questions that are effectively being raised today, one has to ask about progress and whether or not there is something fundamentally broken in progress in that respect.
But that's my question to you guys. Do you think we have made any progress? When you look at the pupil referral units, do you look at the number of Black children that are sent there? Are you optimistic? Do you think things have changed for the better? And also, do you think it's important that films like this are shown on mainstream television and put in front of the mainstream audience? Because there's nothing more powerful than the lived experience.
It's a difficult question. Just recently, like I was reading that report in The Guardian that showed that Black Caribbean kids, along with Roma and Gypsy communities as well, are still suffering disproportionate rates of exclusion. And ESN schools, what was really interesting about that whole process was it was a removal of children from a mainstream setting where they'd have more opportunity and the potential, the opportunity to develop their potential and to achieve their potential. And exclusions that we see today are doing the same thing. They're removing children from that opportunity because they're deemed problematic. And the same reasons that kids were put into ESN schools, as well as IQ, like being perceived to have lower IQs, was for persistent disruptive behavior, which is exactly the same reasons that Black Caribbean kids in particular are being removed today. So for me, when I look at those, when you're reading the newspaper and it's telling you that those kind of statistics are pretty much the same as when my nan and granddad were raising their children, progress to me feels relatively limited.
Bad behaviour.
Poor behaviour. Poorly disciplined.
Bad behaviour.
One of the stereotypes that attached itself and still attaches itself to Black Caribbean children was that they were aggressive and had behavioural problems and that they challenged teachers.
And I have two small kids in the state system at primary school at the moment. And they're doing well, but boy, am I on it. You know, I'm not letting anything, I know the history. And so the teachers know to be very honest with me, because I do ask the questions, you know, and that sort of, you know, the trust that our parents might have had or our grandparents might have had, sadly, perhaps isn't there with me. You know,
what are the questions you're asking, Helen?
I'm making sure that I'm asking those questions.
What are the questions that you're asking?
Well, I want to know how well, not just how well my kids are doing, but I want to be able to see the progress, and I want my children, who I consider to be bright, to be stretched, because I'm aware that once they get to a certain age, and my children are 8, I have twins, they stop being the sweet, cute kids and start being viewed as something very different. And I've made it clear to the teachers at my school, who are amazing teachers, by the way, I've made it very clear to them that I'm aware that that happens. And I am totally invested in my children's education. And I expect a certain standard from them. And I don't want them to go below that. And I think as Black parents, we have to continually ask those questions, not to be hostile, not to be, you know, not to be demanding in any way, but we just have to be persistent to make sure that, you know, that, because I do feel that if you don't ask those questions, then it's possible your children might be not necessarily removed, but be overlooked. And, you know, and the legacy of that we see every day around us, and we just can't allow that to happen. And sadly, that I do feel round about the 7-8 mark, that's when Black children start being viewed very differently.
Steve, do you agree that in some essence, we have to take as parents personal responsibility and beyond the case, as Helen was saying?
I don't think we have a choice, really, do we? I don't think we have a choice. I think that's the thing. We don't have the sort of we don't have the certain kind of privilege of not doing that. You know what I mean? So it's a must. And it's a shame. And I think, you know, this behavioral thing is about love, where to find it. You know, that's the thing. It's not, you know, you think children, certain children are more sort of disruptive, aggressive, misbehaving than other kids. You know, we have to go to the root. You know, they're looking for some kind of love. And that's the word that's missing here, L-O-V-E. And if we care for children, we want the best from them, then we find their potential. And I think the lack of love in this education system is what's happening today. So yeah, you know, you have to go to the root of this. You know, that's it. You know, if you're not getting something somewhere, you're going to try and get some kind of attention elsewhere. L-O-V-E, baby. That's it. You know?
That simple, powerful 4-letter word. James, what do you hope an audience watching this takes away from this 60 minutes?
Well, I think it's fantastic that it's going out at 9 p.m. BBC One, and I hope it reaches as big an audience as possible. And I hope that it pricks the kind of the bubble of complacency that often exists around these questions. I mean, when we talk about progress, one of the elements in the film that's very strong is Bernard Cord talks about the representation of Black people in the classroom, and the representation is you know, how would somebody feel good about themselves if there are no positive role models taught to them when they are growing up? And that's where the supplementary schools stepped in. But it is still a massive problem. I think, you know, my children get taught about Martin Luther King, but they don't get taught about anything that happened in the UK. You know, and you know, that's something that we should all be talking to teachers about. Why are we deifying Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, you know, who did amazing things, without actually acknowledging the civil rights struggle in the UK, as if it didn't happen? And it did happen. Parents had to make it happen. And I hope that people will watch this and see and have that empathy. If our children are not safe from prejudice, then nobody's safe, you know, and that should be a sort of a guiding principle of our society.
Lyttanya, you put your heart and soul into this film. You're, as the director, it's in a way got your signature all over it. What do you could you conclude from what the experiences that you've shared with the audiences and what you've been through making the film as a Black woman?
For me, it's about like being empowered to fight. Being empowered to fight against this level of complacency, being empowered to arm yourself with knowledge, because in doing that, it gives you, I don't want to use combative language, but it does give you the ammunition to then go forward. And like Helen was saying, prepare yourself, make sure that you're aware of the pitfalls that can so easily kind of appear in front of young Black children. For me, like when we were making the film, there was this idea of kind of innocence and innocence lost, and how Steve was saying that the education system lacks love. But what's really significant for me is that how two children who are the same age are judged by different standards. So certain behaviour from one child might not be considered aggressive or disruptive, but for another, it would be. And for me, that impacted me greatly, to think that just because of the accident of where you were born and your skin colour and your culture, yeah, your innocence can be taken away just because of that. So for me, that was really, I'm yet to have a family. I do want to have a family, but the impact it's left on me is kind of like trying to protect the innocence and allowing children to be children, regardless of the colour of their skin. I think that really kind of left it made me really sad, Brenda. I don't know how else to describe it. It's kind of like this sad realization that not everybody is given the equal opportunity to just be a child. And when you're when assumptions and stereotypes are leveled at you, it really does chip away at that. So yeah, like I just want people to watch this and just connect on a human level, like just to put themselves in the position of all the parents and activists that were fighting for the rights of their children. Like I just want the humanity of the film to come through, and I hope that people connect with it on that level.
And I think it certainly does. And I think it's really equally important to thank you all for this opportunity to bring such a vitally important subject to screen. We've sadly run out of time, so I want to thank Steve McQueen, executive producer, James Rogan, executive producer, Lyttanya Shannon, and Helen Bart. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Brenda Imanis, and this has been a BFI at-home discussion. If you've enjoyed it and would like to donate, the BFI is a charity organisation, and details on how you can donate will appear on your screen now. Thank you. Good night.